All right, everybody, it is 12:04. In the interest of time, we will get started. Thanks for joining us today. I think we have a really interesting topic to share with you. Um, Want to start with just a couple odds and ends. I'll start by saying it's this yesterday, Robin, believe it or not, yesterday was the start of my fourth year here leading the team at Pattern. And just want to say, it's really nice to work at an organization that does the kind of work we do. I'm really happy for the support that everyone in the region gives us to make our work possible. One of the nice things about being in this job is having the availability to drive around the region and meet all of you and understand the work that you do. So thanks for sort of opening your work to us and sometimes your data and your minds and all the things that you do to welcome us into the region and make possible the work that Pattern does. It's nice to know that in 2025, we have an organization like this that helps a region make decisions based on information instead of innuendo. So happy to be here. Thanks for continuing to support Pattern. Want to also mention the report that we're going to go through today, called Old Malls, New Uses. We put it out end of last year. I just want to acknowledge, I'm the one who's oftentimes presenting this work, but it's not the case that I'm the one who did the work. So, want to mention Yasmin Aziz from our team. She really took a big chunk of the work here on this report. And then also we had a great summer intern last year, Grace Roebuck, who did a big chunk of the work as well. Grace is going to college in Pennsylvania. Last year, she got the annual scholarship from the Westchester Municipal Officials Association. I'm sorry, Westchester Planning Federation. So I think she's either graduating this year or next year. Anyone needs a planner, go gobble up Grace before someone else does. You can't have, yeah, she's ours. Too bad. So just want to lead with that. And next, I just want to mention, last year we did something for the first time. We put out every year a big independent research agenda, which we develop by talking with our members, talking with regional leaders, talking with our staff, and figuring out what are the most salient topics that are affecting the Hudson Valley, what are our biggest opportunities, what are our biggest challenges, and how can we go out and apply research to those topics and bring it back to the region to, again, help the region make informed decisions. And this project was on that list last year to do. And one of the things we decided to do was ask companies across the region if they wanted to underwrite one company per project, underwrite part of our independent research. And that gives us the talent and time to really work on these and do that with great depth. I like to call it the PBS model. This work is made possible by all of our members, but in this case, it was also made possible with special support from PKF O'Connor Davies. So I want to turn it over to Brian Powers from PKF O'Connor Davies quick. He can tell you a little bit about what they do, but also why they chose to support research in the Hudson Valley. So Brian, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving me a few minutes to speak here. For those of you not familiar with our firm, PKF O'Connor Davies, we're full service certified public accounting and advisory firm. Long history of serving our clients, both, here in the United States and internationally. Our roots go back all the way to 1891. 22 offices in the United States here and also abroad. But here in the Hudson Valley, you may be familiar with our offices in Harrison, Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, and Middletown, and we employ over 1,500 professionals, and we provide a wide range of accounting, auditing, tax, management advisory services as well. And we have a strong practice in government and real estate, and that's really the reason why we get involved with economic development as a whole. The firm makes a strong effort to get to support our community by supporting nonprofit organizations, volunteering, and giving back. And we just believe that the Hudson Valley has great potential for continued growth through economic development. So it made sense when Adam brought us this report to get involved and support it. Just having the ability to look at all the opportunities for adaptive reuse of mall space through the details of this report just begins to set the foundation for a successful plan moving forward for all of our communities. PKF O'Connor Davies were proud members of the Pattern for Progress. One of our partners, Michelle O'Reilly, who's on the call today, just joined the board, and we really believe strongly in the organization's mission. kudos to Adam and his team for the great work in this report and all of the other reports that they have done and the ones that are coming out this year. We're excited to see the continued work, and we're excited to see the report presented today. So again, we're happy to support all the work of Pattern, and thank you for having us here today.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. I mean, if anyone else is interested, we have an independent research agenda we put out at the beginning of the year. If any companies are interested in underwriting some of this research to make sure it happens, I mean, let us know, let Robin know. You know, we make ourselves easy to find. So without further ado, I want to hop right into this. I have a short presentation to share from our report, Old Malls, New Uses. When I'm done, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Mingoia from the town of Amherst IDA, and he's going to walk you through what I think is one of the more complex, creative methodologies that's being employed, certainly here in New York, but even across the country in terms of getting an old mall sort of torn down and then the land be put back to a productive use on behalf of the community. So I want to jump right into this. Before I do talk about the report, just want to do a couple things here. Want to let everyone know, for Pattern members, we have a really kind of unique event coming up in February. We're going to be hosting a discussion with the New York City Planning Director, Dan Garodnick. New York City Planning, you know, a lot of control over what gets built where in New York City, economic development, transit, workforce. I mean, they have their hands in a lot of things having to do with the way New York City operates. They also are increasingly interested in figuring out more regional partnerships with the Hudson Valley. I have not seen in my time a direct mayoral appointee of the city of New York come up to the region and talk about partnerships between the Hudson Valley and New York City. Dan's going to do that with us on February 25th. And that's going to be the kickoff to more routine discussions between New York City and the Hudson Valley about, you know, shared interests that we have, shared opportunities, and ways that we can act more like partner regions instead of just incidental neighbors. So that's going to be a really interesting, important event. As I say, it's going to kick off something bigger. April 2nd, we'll have Mid-Hudson County Leaders Breakfast. I know people in this region have loved that event, so feel free to join us. And I'll just highlight a couple things. We do have it's actually four upcoming bits of research coming out. An introduction to microtransit. For those of you who are concerned about transportation challenges in the region, of which there are many, right? It's always number one or two on the supports that employers are looking for to make sure their employees can get to work and do other things. And as the region ages, we also have challenge getting seniors to the grocery store and to doctor's appointments. And there's all kinds of transportation challenges in the region. Make sure you read this. This is new. This is a different kind of public transit we want to make sure people learn about. An update to demographic trends affecting the region. We'll have that out next month. And then we're trying to figure out a title. It's called Blank from Home right now. We're collecting all these metrics on things that people are doing from home. We just pulled down some data yesterday that we fact check. There has been a 280% increase in the number of people working from home just in the past 5 years. So we're going to dig into those data, try to understand what they mean. Again, these are opportunities to underwrite. If you're interested, let us know. Okay, now let's get into this report. So let's start with, you know, why did we decide to do a report on the fact that our region has some old malls, some dead malls, some malls that are struggling, still have some vibrant malls as well in this region? Why did we decide to do this? Well, we saw out there in the news that there was a lot of news about shopping malls in the Hudson Valley. You had the demolition and redevelopment of some malls facing foreclosure, some that were trying to rebrand themselves as event spaces or doing infill development. And there was just obviously a lot of activity in thinking about sort of the next life of shopping mall properties and how to keep them relevant, and sort of how to keep them sort of responding to market demands and not just sitting fallow. We saw that there were many notable reuse and redevelopment projects throughout the country, and I would say throughout in other parts of the country, they're doing this much more than we are here in New York. Dave might have a better beat on this than I do when he talks, but I think here in New York, we only have sort of 3 large-scale mall redevelopment projects that we found in the course of our research throughout the state. Nationally, there's a national planning firm that said this is the most active asset class for redevelopment across the entire United States. In other words, they're seeing more adaptive reuse of mall property projects than of any other type of property across the country. Certainly, there's a need to share ideas and examples with leaders in the Hudson Valley who are thinking about the next life for that mall property that might be struggling or that might have closed 20 years ago. That's something we want to help the region with. The other thing we learned that I'll get into at the end is that an active government role is really essential in almost every single project we looked at. And that active government role takes different shape and different form depending on the circumstance. Sometimes it's zoning or site master planning or economic development incentives. And we'll get into that in some detail at the end. And as I mentioned, this was part of our 2024 research agenda that was selected by our 180 pattern members and by our board and by our staff. So that's why we did it. So let's talk about sort of the current state of malls in the region. In the report, there's this map, was made by our friends from Delaware Engineering. Thanks very much to them. We have about 17 large-scale shopping malls in the Hudson Valley, and we included some of the old resorts in the Southern Catskills. Why? Because sort of the use profile is very similar. Large buildings, gigantic, expansive parking lots, sort of time has left many of these structures behind. The market in that part of our region is very different. But these are large structures, similar, looking for a second useful life. And certainly we wanted to include them because we think the advice in this project is relevant to those properties as well. Significant space and acreage taken up by closed or nearly empty malls. Just for the malls that are closed or nearly empty, we're talking about 3.2 million square feet sitting on 2,100 acres of land. That includes their parking lots, which, as you know, in some cases are 2, 3, 4 times as big as the mall structure itself. So a lot of property pent up there in parking. There's been a significant shift in market demand. Again, as we think about why some malls are struggling or closing, there's a lot of factors that have played a role in that. Online shopping is certainly one that comes to many people's mind. There's also been a change in habits for people who are still shopping in person. There's more of a run in, run out culture. Pull up to the store you want, run in, get what you need, run out. There are people in a lot of studies that was shown there's less time to stroll around, take your time. People just aren't shopping that way anymore. And so that's why you'll see in part of our report, there's been a little bit of a shift toward strip retail centers and away from indoor malls. And that's in response to this more of a run in, run out shopping culture for those who are still shopping in person. The cost efficiency of those strip centers as well. Listen, mall owners know those big indoor corridors that they can't lease. It's not leasable space. They have to heat it, they have to cool it. That's really difficult and inefficient for those real estate owners, real estate managers. And then last is market oversaturation. You know, malls super popular 50s, 60s, 70s, especially 70s, 80s, 90s. And in some parts of the country, and I think certainly in some parts of this region, the market responded to that demand, but over responded. And so we ended up with more malls in places than we needed. And that made it so that there was not enough market share to sustain all the malls in all the places. Last thing I'll mention, I think Dave will get into this a little bit. The other thing that we found really interesting about the current state of our malls is the degree to which the traditional anchor stores, even if they're not in the mall anymore, have immense power over what happens on the mall property. Many of those anchor stores, so think JCPenney, Sears, Macy's, right, the traditional ones, when they signed 99-year leases to be in those leases came essentially with veto power for them to be able to say what could and could not happen on the property in the future, what could and could not happen in the parking lots in the future. And even if those stores are not in those malls anymore, they still have those rights on that property. And in some cases, that's holding back some redevelopment efforts in this region and elsewhere as those companies choose not to allow the property owners to move forward with projects. We have seen also a lot of action at local malls. Okay, so you know, I grew up, my parents were big mall people growing up. I grew up in Newburgh. We went to the Newburgh Mall every weekend. For For those of you who grew up in mall culture, we did the whole thing. Orange Julius from Friendly's, toy from KB's, have dinner at Ground Round, popcorn in the silent Charlie Chaplin movie. I mean, we did the whole thing, right? So over at the Newburgh Mall, they're steadily transitioning to become more of a strip retail center and not an indoor mall anymore. They've got new leases with Harbor Freight, O'Reilly Auto Parts, Planet Fitness, and this was the direction the market was pushing them. And they tried to get, in interviewing them, they tried to get tenants for the indoor mall, but the market demand was pushing them toward becoming a strip retail center. They're there at the intersection of the Thruway and I-84. And we've seen this in the region before. For those of you who were in Dutchess County, you'll remember the old South Hills Mall. That, has since transitioned from an indoor mall to a full retail strip center with Bob's Furniture and other stores there at that strip center. Gallery and Crystal Run over in Middletown, also in Orange County. They're taking a little bit of a different route. They actually have approval to build 224 units of housing in part of the parking lot for the mall, and it happens to be the part of the parking lot that's essentially closest to the Metro North Station, the Middletown Metro North Station that's there. They're seeking approval for another 250 units of housing to be built in the parking lot and a 132-room hotel with a pedestrian walkway that would go into the mall food court. So there, Pyramid, the company that owns that mall, is betting that if they build some housing, they build a hotel, that critical mass of activity, along with rethinking what's in the mall, right? A little bit more entertainment, recreation, restaurants, will keep that property humming along and being viable for all kinds of activities. And that's similar to what they're doing up at the Crossgates Mall in Albany, where they're also building housing. Now, we also have some real challenges at a lot of our malls and uncertainty at a lot of our malls. The Palisades Center Mall in Rockland County, which is the 13th largest mall in the entire United States. Creditors there are moving to foreclose on that property, trying to collect on about $400 million in debt. It's being operated right now by a special servicer. That mall is still largely occupied. I mean, still largely filled up by stores and other tenants, but there's a large degree of uncertainty about what happens with that mall in the future. Apollo Plaza Mall in Sullivan County, right? Closed 22 years ago, severely dilapidated. I mean, last time I drove by, there was a tree growing out of the roof, right? So challenge for that mall. Hudson Valley Mall, here where I live in Ulster County, only has 5 retailers left. One of them's getting ready to leave. Consequently, it was frankly, the only mall owner that didn't call us back for this study, but certainly some challenges there. Also a market where probably some pretty strong opportunities exist. So we have some real challenges in local malls, but we also have local malls that are making moves to try to sort of remain vibrant and viable and competitive in this shifting market. Now, as we looked at projects across the country where they were reusing malls and mall properties, a lot of them had something in common. The vast majority of projects that we found, in fact, the one that Dave's going to present, are shifting the mall property to become something called a 20-minute community. Well, what is a 20-minute community? A 20-minute community is sort of an old model of urban design in which most of your needs can be found within a 20-minute walk of a resident's house, okay? So in typical New York terms, let's call it a hamlet, right? They're talking about building a hamlet from the ground up where the mall used to be. And in this case, all these projects that replace the malls have things in common. They have lots and lots of housing, okay? They have retail and commercial space. They have restaurants. They always have some sort of public park or public trail. There's public space involved that tends to be at the very center, at the nucleus of these projects. A lot of them have health centers, medical centers, doctors, gyms. What makes these sites good for building these things from the ground up? Well, the mall properties are large. They generally have good utility access. They have water, they have sewer, they have electricity. Some of them have a lot of electricity. You'd be shocked by what the size of the electrical feeds coming into some of these malls. A lot of times the plan is to actually tear down the whole mall and look at the whole property as a blank slate to build these 20-minute communities from the ground up. In some cases, projects we looked at that are in the report, they didn't tear down the whole mall, but they tore down the guts of the mall and they left 3 of the anchor stores as pad sites. Okay, so they become standalone pad sites in the greater community that's built out. And there's some real things that all these projects had to look at. For instance, does the zoning fit? You know, this was a big hurdle for a lot of the projects across the country that we looked at. If we're going to tear down a mall and the zoning there is for commercial and retail, do we need to rezone it to allow mixed use so that you can have housing and parks and retail and commercial and all the sorts of things that fit into a 20-minute community? And to some degree, this is simply what's old is new again, right? We're talking about walkability. We're talking about connection. We're talking about walking from where you live to where you shop and maybe even where you work. We're talking about thriving interconnected communities that are replacing malls where people drove from long distances to park in big lots and shop, right? So this is a little bit of what's old is new again. In our region, we only have really one project that's headed down this route. You know, notwithstanding those that are building housing in the parking lots, which is a little bit of a different angle to get at this from. And that's at the former White Plains Galleria, which is a project I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is a large mall that took up, I think, something like 2 square blocks in the city of White Plains, about 10 acres in total. There is a plan right now by a number of organizations, including the Capelli organization, to tear that mall down, to tear down the parking garage, tear down the mall, and rebuild it as a mixed-use community. And that mixed-use community, they're putting together a master plan. It has a TOD element because it's only 3 to 4 blocks from the Metro North Station. They're talking about 3,200 units of housing, 2,000 square feet of retail. Believe it or not, 48% of the total acreage would be set aside as public space. You can see in this rendering here some of the public plazas and some restaurants that would be around the perimeter of that public plaza to make it not only a great place to live, but a great place to kind of get together with friends, families, community members, and hang out. The mall, as it exists now, many of you have driven through White Plains know it kind of sits as a gigantic cinder block in the middle of the city. You know, no visibility really through it. And so this would really open up that space, enliven that space. And in our report, we also have examples very similar to this project in White Plains from Arizona, from Utah, from North Carolina. Projects like this are happening all across the United States at defunct malls. Now, I want to back up and just mention one thing. Some of you have heard me say this at public talks I've given on housing. That first bullet there, there's always a lot of housing involved in these. Yaz and I were on the phone with some architects who have the market cornered on these projects out west. And they told us a story in the suburbs of Scottsdale, Arizona, where they went to the local planning board with a project to redevelop a mall. And their initial proposal had 1,600 units of housing in it, among the commercial, the retail, all the parkland, all the other stuff. They came back to that planning board the next month, and the planning board asked them, what do we need to do to turn 1,600 units of housing into 2,000? And we had them sort of repeat that story 2 times because we thought we heard it wrong. And then we heard the same story from a bunch of other places. And so a lot of you have heard me say this, but it left us wondering, what is the mindset they're in? Okay, they're in a sort of a development, growth, and vibrancy mindset. They understand the need for housing. They're willing to build it. Their land use boards would like to see more of it built, where it should be built, smart growth, downtown, you know, density where we have it, where we have water and sewer. And it got us thinking about, okay, if that's the mindset out there, where they're building lots of housing as part of these mall projects, well, what's the mindset here? And I keep saying across the region, we have to be careful that our mindset doesn't become, how do we shut it down, slow it down, and cut it in half? Their mindset is, how do we make sure we're adding more if we're going to have this development in the appropriate places that we've set aside for development, so we can set other places aside for conservation. So very important to think about the way we think about projects and the way others think about projects. Before I pass it on to Dave, a couple key takeaways. As I mentioned, something that ran common across every interview we did and every sort of case that we published in this study was that the reuse of mall properties really required an active government role in almost every case, but that government role was different in each case, okay? Sometimes it was simply rezoning, which I don't mean to say is simple, right? That's complex, but rezoning the parcel to make sure you would allow and entice and encourage the things that you want to see done there. In some cases, it was real master planning, where there was master planning done for a district that included the mall property, and there was water and sewer and Wi-Fi thought about in parks. There was true master plan behind the project. In some cases, there was introducing developers to existing mall owners. If the mall owner can't come up with ideas on their own or needs to be nudged a little bit, having that introduction made, sitting down and thinking about what the future might look like. There were some questions about what do you do with a foreclosed mall? I think there's broader questions about what we do with foreclosed properties in general across the region, especially ones that are key. Do we just stick it in an auction and cross our fingers that someone benevolent's going to buy it and do the right thing? Or does the government take an active role and put together an RFEI or an RFQ or some sort of document that sends a message out to the development world and says, hey, we'll be willing to turn this mall property over to someone who's willing to do X, Y, and Z to put this back into productive use for the community. Reduce parking requirements. This was important in almost every case. We're going to be doing a report later this year, pattern looking at, methods to reuse or sort of think differently about really big, gigantic parking lots. We have a lot of big parking lots across this region that are never more than a quarter full and were overbuilt from the day the asphalt was laid down. And just thinking about that is really important. And then IDAs and other benefits to induce redevelopment. So government role, different shape in every case. ESD, it's important to mention ESD here in New York. They administer some funds that can help for communities that have a mall and want to think about reusing it. You could get a strategic planning and feasibility grant and work with the mall owner to put together a master plan for redevelopment. There are some infrastructure funds available in case you need to run infrastructure to a mall property to make it viable for redevelopment. And then, of course, there's Restore New York and some other funds that will actually help pay for the tearing down of the mall or in the case you want to reuse it, refurbishing the building. Important here, we don't want to sound like we're not in touch with reality. Every idea is not going to work in every market, okay? What works in White Plains is not going to work in White Sulphur Springs, which is a little town up in Sullivan County, okay? What works in Monticello is not necessarily the best thing for Mount Vernon, right? So we have a lot of different types of communities in different contexts. And by the way, they each come with their own market demand, right? So not every idea is going to work in every place. We have companies also working locally that have done redevelopments of malls in other parts of the country. I was down in Rockland County late last year, talking about housing. Talked with a developer down there that had done exactly one of these projects in the suburbs of Cleveland. So we have some local expertise on this. And you can see old malls new uses, see the report on our website for other resources. I have them listed here, but we have a whole bunch of resources in that report on 6 guiding principles for transforming old malls, examples of other places where they're doing this, reports from the Urban Land Institute, lots of good stuff. So Pattern celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. We're going to have a lot of exciting things throughout the year. I want to thank again PCAF O'Connor Davies for underwriting the work on this report. We cannot do this independent research for the region without the support we receive from our members and our sponsors and our underwriters. And with that, before we open it up for questions, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Mingoia, who's a special guest with us today. Dave leads the IDA in the town of Amherst, which is in the Buffalo area, suburbs of Buffalo. And Dave has what I think is one of the most aggressive, interesting, creative mall reuse projects anywhere in the country. It involves the use of eminent domain. It involves the use of some really creative financial and legal and development agreement instruments. And so, Dave, I'm going to hand it over to you. Share with us what you're doing, and hopefully everyone here can learn a little bit from what's going on just north of us in Amherst.
Sure. Let me pull up my deck here.
Right ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to kind of, if you haven't traveled out here, if you have, you've probably driven by the town or through the town if you're not familiar with it. In terms of population and location, we're actually the fourth largest municipality, kind of outside the Hudson Valley. Bigger than Albany. A lot of people don't realize that. Just a little bit smaller than Syracuse, about 132,000 people, and then it's not trailing Buffalo and Rochester by huge amounts. We do border the northeast corner of the city of Buffalo, and have a major university center, which you'll see in a couple slides as we kind of go through this. So, real quick. This is kind of a snapshot of my organization that I run. Not that different structurally than, some of the IDAs down in the Hudson Valley. Size-wise, probably somewhat similar. We do have a full-time planning department and an economic development department that has another two staff members that work directly for the town. We're completely separate. We function kind of outside, but we work in partnership and really work to implement the town's comprehensive plan and strategies. Been around since IDAs were born back in the late 60s, early 70s. About $3 billion in total investment. Our projects return about $20 million annually in property taxes to the local taxing jurisdictions. But the reason you're here now that I got my little commercial out of the way is we have a dead mall, just about dead. It's on life support. The Boulevard Mall property. It's on the western edge of the town, located on a state arterial, Route 62, Niagara Falls Boulevard, and then a county road, Maple Road, which is on the left-hand side of that site. It's about 1 million square feet, and it was one of the most successful malls in the region until they built a larger regional mall uh, about 8 miles south, right on the I-90, in the Cheektowaga Buffalo border, the Walden Galleria, if anybody's ever been there. With the kind of the advent of that, this mall started to see some vacancy, and I think also, as Adam mentioned, the patterns of the types of retail, kind of the pull out in front, run in specifically for what you want and leave, kind of your power center, your power park shopping setup, which is only about a half-mile north of this, is a thriving retail area that see continued investment. We're getting a new Costco and a new Dick's House of Sports, which is the larger Dick's Sporting Goods store that allows you to try out kayaks and climb on rock walls and things like that. So the area isn't dead per se from a retail standpoint, but just the model and the fashion of this mall is. Um, as with the most cases, I know we've talked a little bit about infrastructure. Um, a lot of times when you have these regional malls that aren't built in a city center, they lack sufficient sewer and water. And it's always something when you start thinking about and revisiting on some of these sites is, do we have capacity in our utilities to come to this? And we knew right off the bat that we had a deficiency here. And I'll get into how we kind of came up with a solution for that. It wasn't a short-term solution, but you think about if you want to introduce any kind of lodging or any kind of residential to the site, you're exponentially increasing the use of sewer and water, and it's a major impediment to redeveloping all these properties. The other thing this had was some anchors. There's a J.C. Penney on the left side of the site. There's a Macy's in the middle. There's actually an old Sears store at the end. It's the legacy leases is something that is probably the biggest impediment on some of these properties. They control not only parking rights, as an example, the Penny's site, which I think you guys can see my cursor, which is right here, basically has parking rights all the way over in the front here. So I mean, these were long-term leases. This was a Forest City property from back in the day. you know, 50 years ago. And, you know, between that and then the view shed portions of the lease, where if I'm traveling along Niagara Falls Boulevard or Maple, you know, I have to be able to see this building. So those are huge impediments. And for any developer to get out of them, sometimes it's prohibitive in the lease, and the retailers kind of have you, you know, over the barrel in terms of cost and trying to break that up. We kind of laugh when the you know, when the architects and the designers came up with this rendering. There hasn't been that amount of parking in that parking lot for God, probably a decade plus. So that's a somewhat rosy picture of what the customers are for this property. So our planning, and we had the luxury of having a good town board and a supervisor who's an architect and a planner elected back in 2017, that really kind of understood, like, hey, we need to do something with this section of town. The market really isn't helping us out here. So the kind of the age old, it had an 80+ million loan on it that was coming due. It was put into receivership. It actually went up for auction in 2018 and was purchased by Douglas Development for $25 million. Now, Douglas Development's interesting because they primarily do urban projects, mixed use, redevelopment, historic tax credit. So this was a little bit out of their typical portfolio of projects. COVID hits, you know, they buy it, auction, COVID hits. As we know, I mean, COVID didn't kill retail, it just accelerated bad retail's decline. So we knew that through the leasing structure, with respect to parking, with respect to view shed, there was going to be a problem here. Just from 2016 to 2023, we had an 80% reduction in loan market fair market value. It was probably around $90 million in 2008. So I mean, we've seen a significant loss in assessment, and that obviously has a direct relationship to our school districts and our town and our county with respect to revenue. We'll get into how we got there, but in spring 2022, the town took action and decided that we were going to go the eminent domain route on this particular property. We didn't have a situation where we could, you know, work with the developer and just redevelop it. The beauty, and again, it's not a short term and it's not a cheap way of doing it, but the beauty of eminent domain is not only do you acquire the property, but you also clear out all of those legacy leases that are in place for the retailer. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Currently, I mean, that's what kind of the mall looks like on a daily basis. There's nothing in the middle of it. You just have some exterior tenants, Macy's, Penny's, Dick's, until their new store opens in probably a little over a year. And then a small screening room type restaurant, film operation. And that's really the only thing that's in there right now. And I mean, that has a direct relationship on the owner. They had to pull a $1 million plowing contract a month ago. And you can just look at that and say there's no way they're generating enough revenue just by keeping the lights on, some fair level of heating, et cetera, to kind of pay for that. So they're continuing to lose money, you know, on a daily basis. A lot of planning went involved. This kind of was a driver for it. So back when opportunity zones, and some of you probably know what that is, it was a federal program to try and increase investment in you know, federally designated areas. This whole area we call our Boulevard Central District is about 900 acres. And the idea and the concept was, well, we need to come up with a plan for this. It's like, what kind of investment, what kind of change do we want to see? And if you kind of look, it's kind of the brownish magenta that's in here. All this was just gray. It was retail, and this is the mall property here in the middle of it. And really thinking about how to introduce and create that hamlet, create that neighborhood, create that mixed use, and kind of re-energize these spaces. And it really was the basis for our action plan, and gave the town some comfort to move forward with eminent domain and the stuff we're working on now. So here, the other obstacle we have on this, and I don't know if this is similar to some of the challenges on your mall properties in your region, is we have multiple owners on this property. It would have been a lot easier of a situation if we had only one owner. So as I mentioned, in 2018, the mall went through an auction and was purchased by Douglas Development. They primarily are the pinkish color over here. So the entire outside in the dot is our urban renewal area. But so this is primarily the mall property here that we're working on specifically. So Douglas Development bought everything in the pink. We had another developer that owned the green. This is the J.C. Penney's property. Firestone owns this red portion up here in the corner. And then there's another automotive repair shop down here that we actually just took out of the urban renewal area, just because it's a local owner. And we said, listen, if the owner of the property and the redeveloper wants to buy them out, let them do it. But we weren't going to get in a situation, and I think it was more of a political decision not to include that as part of the eminent domain property. So the town established an urban renewal agency. This is state law. Followed it. What you're doing is you're describing the area and documenting the slum and blight that's present. I think we demonstrate that easily through kind of the decline of the property and the vacancy. And then in January 2023, we actually had our findings adopted, Article 2, which basically is a legal part of the taking process, where we say, the town's interested in acquiring this property, and here's the basis for it. It took us a little bit of time because J.C. Penney challenged it. None of the other property owners challenged it. It was kind of interesting to talk to at least Douglas Development from a developer standpoint. I mean, they welcome this because it was going to help them to redevelop the property, and that's been a huge challenge. It's kind of what's tied our hands a little bit these last 6-7 months is trying to deal with these multiple developers and get one of them to buy the other one out in order for us to move forward. So we, as of this past summer, we're free to move ahead with Articles 3 and 4, which is we're declaring we're going to take it and then deciding on value. And there's really, once you get to this point, there's really two methods you can go in. So we could, if your community has the wherewithal, or if you're dealing with a single developer, you could float a bond. You could come up with some kind of financing in order to satisfy and acquire the underlying parcels from the individual owners. Or you can try and work with the existing owners to come up with a development agreement. And that's the part we're pursuing now, just because of the multiple owners. The challenge here is, if you cannot get a property owner to agree on a sale price before you take it, they could challenge it in court, and then really the court decides ultimately what you pay. The court cannot prohibit you from acquiring the property as a municipality. You acquire it once you enact Article 4. It's a matter of what the value is, and it's somewhat of a risk proposition. And it's something the town just isn't comfortable with doing now. But if you had a community that was doing really well and had a lot of bond capacity, you could go through a scenario where you would just go through Article 4, you'd acquire everything, and you would just either rely on the courts to set a fair market value just to pay everybody off. But you could just move forward and RFP the whole property. We're going to do a scenario where, at least we're pursuing it now, where we're going to work with one of the developers to acquire a couple other parcels and do some infrastructure work, and we'll end up with probably a third of the site to RFP for some of the things we want to see there. So again, I think if there's one other takeaway here, this is not a quick process. As I mentioned, we kind of started back in 2017. We were already moving forward on mixed use zoning districts, kind of taking that old Euclidean, here's where your shopping center goes, here's where your office building goes, here's where your residential building goes, and allowing for a combination of those and increasing density. Also had some, you mentioned parking. It also allows some alternate parking plans where really it scales the parking to the actual development. The other thing we did is we've gone through and we have one generic environmental impact statement. We're updating it now. What we're doing in this area is we are going to allow for a streamlined approval process. We're trying to remove the risk on the development side to projects and kind of how things could get tied up through future political action or planning board site action. As I mentioned, we did zone it, and we allow 5 and 8 stories currently on the mall property now. And before, things were limited to roughly 65 feet. That was kind of our general business or shopping center. But our new Center 5 and Center 8 has a whole bunch of setback requirements and things that are more conducive to a mixed use walkable versus your typical setback suburban style zoning. We set forth and through that Boulevard Central District and some additional planning exercise, we set forth and came up with kind of what our guiding principles and what our redevelopment requirements are. This is important because this is what we're going to communicate out to the development community for our portion of the site we're going to send an RFP out on, but also for kind of sets forth kind of a standard for that entire 900 acres, not just the 64 that makes up the mall site. And I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail here. So principal land use and zoning, and this is, this ties back into that generic environmental impact statement. This is what we've have in there as build out estimates. We don't think we're going to get this high. Especially just on the mall site. As you can see, kind of the boundary area is a little bit larger than the mall area. It's still within the urban renewal area, but the mall area cuts off right around here where this red is. And this gets into a different parcel. And actually, we have another kind of dead mall that was never really built and redeveloped down here. We may have to deal with in the near future. That's for another day. But our plan is really to provide a different style of retail here and an inviting multifamily environment. The office is probably a little higher, just based on what's going on in the office market. Even with a lot of return to work and increasing hybrid kind of models, the office we have here will probably be more along the medical lines and service sides than what you would typically think of from an office standpoint. And our second principle here is how we're going to reintroduce roads and blocks into the site and make them walkable. That's kind of an overhead shot there of the mall with, Niagara Falls Boulevard here. This is our western boundary. That's Maple up at the top. And then this is Alberta, which is a local road. So it's kind of interesting. We go state, county, and local roads around us. And then there's another plaza down here that has separate ownership on the south side of it. But the idea and the concept is to create a neighborhood scale, complete street design, and then have the roads be publicly owned once they are constructed. Some on-street parking. We think eventually we'll get to decks, but that'll be a phasing in. So there'll still be some surface parking that we're hoping to minimize, as well as at least maybe on the residential integrating 1 or 2 stories into the actual buildings. And that'll be something we'll be asking for when we go out for RFP and when we're working with the developer on their portion of the site for development. One thing obviously we're concerned about is making sure that we have a mixture here for, kind of all income levels. And so we're allocating some of this for affordable for senior and family, a tie to some workforce units. And then, the rest of it will be market rate. Student probably not as much as a target. We're leaving the door open on that. I think structurally, it's not like we're going to prohibit a student from renting something, but I think we want a certain style of apartment that really goes across the different market segments. And again, the idea is upper story residential, especially on those, 5, 6, 7, 8-story buildings, and then, active first floors. And it'll be oriented more towards, towards the community center and the green space elements. That picture, so the picture down at the bottom is a senior affordable that's kind of adjacent to the site. We'll probably maybe see something a little bit larger on the scale. The picture at the top was some visioning that was done by our design team to look at kind of what full build out might be, in the future, and what, basically a 1 million square foot big box style mall could be transitioned to over the years.
Dave, we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll fly then. Public green space in it. Idea is to have something active in the middle. Might be a bid, some special taxing jurisdiction. Also allows for some stormwater runoff, as well as some pop-up retail and commercial. As I mentioned, there will be a community center. We're looking at an existing building actually to retrofit for this. Just, again, active, provide some activity and some community focused uses on the site. We do have the opportunity for increased transit service. There's a light rail study that would kind of run along that blue highlighted line that would come out of our terminus of it. That's at the University of Buffalo, the edge of the town, southwest edge of the town, run along Niagara Falls Boulevard, right past our site, and then out through the university and terminate up in one of our business park areas. So that's the idea. There's also a bus rapid transit option that we're looking at in the event the funding doesn't really come through for this. That would extend out of the city of Buffalo, where it's being constructed right now, and extend out towards us. So we're looking at definitely enhanced transit, allowing people to kind of get out of their cars and move around, or for those that don't have a car to be able to access employment, shopping, etc. services. So our kind of our timeline and what we want to do is really get our RFP shored up this year, get our sale agreement set up with our existing preferred developer who's going to acquire most of the site, and then get our master site plan accelerated review process on the books at the town. That would be part of our urban renewal overlay zoning law. So there's a lot of technical stuff in here that I know I'm glancing over, but I'm obviously available if anybody would like, more information on some of these things. There will have to be some probably public financing that's associated with this. We did receive in budget a year and a half ago a $31 million sewer capacity upgrade that's currently, I think it's out for design and bid. I think construction is going to start in the next couple months, so we can frankly have more toilets on this site, right? I mean, that's really what we're looking at here. The GIS will be completed, and what we're looking at is using pilots as a financing tool. We use the term PIF, so it's pilot or increment financing. As you know, TIF, which is used in a lot of other states, doesn't really work that well in this state. So what we'll do is work with the taxing jurisdictions to enter into agreements that allow us to capture those new property taxes that are designated and return that to affected portions of infrastructure and stuff on the site. We'll use some HUD home funds and look to potentially some federal sources for some additional road and infrastructure work. So that's kind of the initial master site plan there on the right. You can see where the new roads are and kind of where the initial buildings are boxed at. and which are kind of what the uses of them are for. We're kind of forecasting this as our first 10 years of development. They'll start on the periphery and kind of work in internally. We've modeled out some pilots based on some conservative estimates, and so we can pay for things. Those costs at the bottom, as I mentioned, we're trying to take a path where we're getting a developer to finance these things, and then we'll pay it back through PIF proceeds. It's kind of an interesting way. We're near the finish line on getting the developer comfortable with that. So I hopefully we'll have some good news in the next couple months on this. But we're close, and if everything goes right, we'll continue to fill in. As you can see, that rendering on the right includes additional buildings that are constructed. That's probably hopefully years 10 through 20 as we transform the existing mall into something that is not only someplace people wants to be, but also starts to reverse some of the tax decline that we've seen over the years. And I know
I just want to say, Dave, if you go back to that slide before we lose more folks, I just want to say I love that slide because it shows sort of what you have now, the mass of what you have now versus the vision of what will end up, 5, 10 years from now being there. More green space, more walkable. You don't have this big mass of a single building, but you've broken it up into something that's walkable and more in line with what sort of the market demand is now for a variety of different types of spaces. So I love that last slide, that before and after rendering and what you have now with the mass. So
yeah, I mean, it's really meant to be flexible. I mean, we're not necessarily forecasting what's going to be the hot segment in 10 years, but we're allowing for it in the zoning and allowing for it from a massing standpoint. We're more concerned about how the buildings orient to the street and creating that neighborhood feel than we are necessarily, what the specific uses are at this particular point.
So Dave, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll just say, if anyone has questions, I'll ask you to click the raise your hand function on Zoom. So raise your digital hand, not your human hand, because I can't see all your human hands, unfortunately. So if anyone has a question, raise your digital hand, whether it's for me or Dave, we're happy to answer them if you have them. I always say, don't be bashful. Someone has to bat lead off, whether you like it or not.
And I'll be happy to share the slide deck too, if people want to, circle back with me via email or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share whatever further documentation if you want some further details on stuff. But we're pretty close. We've got a draft of an RFP we've been working on, and we're getting there. So,
all right. So anyone have questions? For those of you who are still on and you're in a community with a mall, things can be done. It takes an active role. It takes a willing partner, but there's a lot of creative ways to get your mall from sort of a dead, fallow, big building to something that's actually providing a beneficial use to the community in a lot of different ways.
Mhm.
All right, going once. All right, wait, Danielle has a question. Go ahead, Danielle. Unmute.
I did have a quick question. I don't know if it's a quick question, but just a thought in this reuse of very large constructed entities just on what we're doing with the materials that will no longer be there. Is that a process we're also thinking about when we're looking at reuse of these properties?
So I can only speak from my experience. In my previous job, we went through what's called a value engineering process where we would look at not only the disposal of materials on site from demolition in terms of how far away we were taking them, but whether any could be used in, say, crushed road aggregate for the new roads that were built and things like that. So that process usually does go on as part of the design, bid, build process. There's usually a value engineering process, Danielle, that asks exactly those kinds of questions in the interest of reusing anything that you can, and then anything you can't reuse, either looking for markets for it or looking to dispose of it in a place that's not too distant, so you're not, say, burning lots of fossil fuels, taking it across the country or something like that.
Yeah, the one thing the good news for us on this particular property is, most of the asbestos and stuff has been abated. So we have pretty much a clean facility from that standpoint. But there's definitely a market for the steel. You know, to the extent that most of it can be used. We're gonna need fill on the site. So there will be a lot of opportunities to reuse materials, but there is going to be some. It's just going to be the nature of it that's going to end up in a landfill. So,
Any other questions? Thank you, Danielle, for batting lead off. I appreciate you.
Sorry, I can't find my virtual hand.
That's all right, Jeff. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. It's really exciting. And I couldn't tell by the scale of that last image that Adam liked, and so do I. The blocks seem pretty large, and I know they match to the blocks in the existing surrounding area. But did you consider blocks that were a little bit smaller? It might make it a little more walkable.
so the master plan, kind of the orange and gray and those types of blocks, there will be internal circulation that's required of all those, and that's baked right into the zoning code. So that's really just to show some of the larger, probably car oriented circulation. Because I mean, the reality of it is, we all love vibrant places that doesn't have a lot of parking lots and things like that. I mean, it's most attractive. It's high end real estate, high value real estate. But I mean, the reality of it is, we live in, inside or partially inside for so many months a year. Especially our climate's even a little bit different than yours is down there in the Hudson Valley. So we can't completely ignore that. But most of what you saw there is primary roads. A couple of those around the green space will be able to be closed off for when there's festivals or things going on. But those are the main circulations. And again, the zoning code requires internal circulation as part of the development, as part of the site plan for each of those blocks.
Great, fantastic, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other questions before we start? Okay, if anyone thinks of, oh, wait, hold on, Barbara, go ahead, Barbara.
Dear, am I still muted?
We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm wondering, since I know about the transit villages. In fact, I helped develop one in South Orange, New Jersey. But I wonder, since a lot of the malls are in suburban areas, and there's a big push to have things greener, but people want their motor vehicles and they need places to park them and have access to them. Would it benefit or better help to sell many of these projects by offering other green offsets like solar energy or rain gardens or things that would convince the powers that be that this is a good use that is beneficial. It's not just providing more housing, and it's not just a tax grab, a property tax grab.
So Barbara, in the projects that we reviewed as part of the report, there were often the kinds of elements worked into the project that you're talking about. So where there were large buildings built, they were often accompanied by solar energy on the roofs, things of that nature. And I think it's just worth acknowledging, in our region, we kind of have a mix. We have a couple malls that are directly next to train stations. We have a couple malls that are very, very adjacent to existing bus routes, either within a county loop or down to the city, in the case of like an Adirondack Trailways or a Greyhound or some of those other buses. And then we have some that are more, I'd say, rural in nature and a little less suburban. So we have a real mix, Barbara. Some, if you could build something new at the mall that was walkable, you would actually have pretty easy access to transit to get off the site and go somewhere for work if you needed to do that. And some don't. But hopefully it answers your question, Dave. You can weigh in. The projects we saw did work into their ultimate design, whether it was green space or solar energy, some of the climate-minded considerations that you listed.
Yeah, I mean, we're counting and planning to allow for some type of increased transit. We think there will be. I mean, if you think about how technology is changing, we're probably better off planning for autonomous electric buses than we are for a light rail system. Just based on the cost and the size and scale of the infrastructure you need for light rail. Plus, I'm not sure the the new federal administration is really going to have a lot of money for that either. So, but that might be the fiscal reality of it. But where we can, there will be solar rooftop. I mean, right now we have a site, we call them gray fields, right? They're not brown fields, they're just full of parking. We have no green on there now, so the idea is definitely try and start greening up that area more.
Yeah. Any other questions, folks?
Thank you.
Thomas.
Hey, hi everyone.
Hello.
Has consideration ever been given to reusing the mall structure itself and converting it? I know architecturally that's a challenge. What's the experience in that area? Thanks.
So the only, and Dave, you can weigh in as well. We reviewed literally dozens of projects across the country as part of our research. And the only ones we saw where there was any reuse of the structure was, as I mentioned, the reuse of the anchor stores as pad sites. In other words, the Macy's, the JCPenney's, the Sears, the Target, whatever it might be, was sort of chopped off from the mall and made to be its own pad site. And then the rest of the development was built around or in the interstitial space between those pad sites. And to some degree, that's something for those who are familiar with the Hudson Valley Mall in Kingston, that's already happened in Kingston, where New Vance Health created a imaging and treatment center by chopping part of the old mall in Kingston off the mall and reusing that building as a medical center. So that's what we saw largely, Thomas, was that we didn't really see any projects where they were reusing the entire structure.
So I think we've, we looked at that and we started thinking, well, maybe Macy's will stay in their store, maybe Penny's will stay in their store. Maybe we can get another use or convert some of these big boxes into it. Some of it's just market driven. And from our conversations and our kind of interests and meetings and analysis, it's 1 million square feet. It's 1 million square feet, but it's only 10 million to kind of knock it all down and start new again. And you're looking at 50-year-old buildings that don't have much purposeful reuse. The underlying land's worth more than without the building on it. So we're probably going down the path again. A lot of this can change in the next couple months. Probably going down the path of having the whole thing demolished, especially when we look at laying the infrastructure down. And how we want to have the site laid out and where the most cost-effective and efficient way to lay the electric and the sewer and the water is, which is along those road corridors that we had labeled. So I don't think much, if any, of this mall is going to remain after it. We do see that. Again, some of the smaller properties in and around the region where somebody will take an old store and convert it into something, or a small strip plaza and recreate it into a medical facility. But on this particular project, I think we're looking at full demo.
Regis, the last question goes to you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate David, everything you presented, and Adam for sponsoring this. My question really has to do with principle number 3, which has to do with housing and affordability. One of the things we found out here in Ulster County, thanks to the work of Adam and his group, that in order for housing to be affordable, this 80%, which is a pretty common number, 80% of AMI, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in our county, and that which becomes affordable was closer to 38%, because it had to do with not only a study of earnings, within our county, but also the artificial elevation of AMI due to migration of a lot of New York City people coming up during the pandemic. So anyway, is that a floatable principle? In other words, that 80% of median AMI?
So we have a working policy. I wouldn't call it an official policy yet, because we're trying to get it approved countywide. We currently will do some small scale redevelopment, a lot of 1-story retail that's turning into, 4 or 5-story mixed use properties. We'll have a 20% of the units set aside at 80% of AMI for cost. So the pricing of the units will be set at what 80% is, but we're allowing incomes on those units to fluctuate between 80 and 100. And we've been fairly successful with it on a smaller scale. And we're using the IDA incentives to offset that through pilots and sales tax, and then requiring those units to be for a 15-year period to be maintained as workforce in return for the incentives. But it's definitely a question on the capital stack, especially when we get into several hundred units, on how that's going to be put together, which is why we're hopeful that we'll have a building that'll have a kind of the spectrum of diversity of income levels throughout it, so you can use some of the market and luxury product to drive some of the cost savings on that kind of that middle class, for lack of a better way of describing it, housing, that workforce housing. Because as we all know, there's a set market for the truly affordable, right? The 30 to 60% housing community renewal, state, federal, HUD, et cetera. And so that's got its own market and its own piece. But, we've started to dabble a little bit by using the IDA to kind of induce and provide some savings so we can get those units at that price point.
So Regis, Dave said a lot of what I was going to say. Their forces up there are a little different than the forces that are shifting area median incomes and some of the metrics that are used to underline those affordable set-asides here. What I'll say is it's town by town, by city, by village, what the rules are in terms of what percentage of units are set aside at different levels of affordability. And even our team at Pattern has designed different things for different places. I mean, we designed one that was an a la carte thing where a developer had to reach 10 points and they could get to 10 points by doing some at 30% and 50% and 70 and 80 of AMI. That has seemed to work well in one place. Some just want to do 80, some want to go down to 60 because, as Dave pointed out, there are some federal and state programs that will finance units at 60. We know where the need exists. The other part of that equation is right now, Dave mentioned the capital stack. This may be hard to believe, but it's really difficult for housing developers to actually put together a fully capitalized project right now. And in fact, I don't want to say most, but a significant number of the housing developments that are sort of approved but sitting on the bench in the Hudson Valley right now, in other words, they don't have shovels in the ground, are facing about a 15% capital gap that they can't figure out. And some of that has come in the form of inflation on HVAC equipment. Some of it's come in the form of, high land costs and labor costs, and even the really explosive rate of increase in insurance. So right now it's very, very hard to get a capital stack, which is why what Dave said, having some units at the higher end to balance out those needs on the lower is, one of the things a lot of communities are looking at. It's tough to figure out the chemical equation right now.
Yeah, and even if you can work the numbers out, it's hard to get the financial institutions to even let the loan out. We induced about $130 million in mixed use projects last year, and they're slow to get out the gate in terms of that final commitment letter. But we've seen some movement in the first month, so we're hoping that some of these things kind of stabilize and we get some lending activity.
Yeah. All right, we have lost half our friends. So with that in mind, we're going to close this session. I want to say thanks again. Thanks to PKF O'Connor Davies. Thanks to Dave. Thanks to you all. Follow up with us if you have follow-up questions. And let's put some real thought in our communities into how we can stitch together ideas and projects and plans and financing and all the things that go into helping these malls come back to life. And let's give thanks to the mall developers and owners who are proactively going down that path on their own. So thanks to everybody for showing up. You know where to find us. Have a great rest of the week.